Hey everyone, what's going on? Before we get started, do excuse the small bruise under my eye. That was an accidental elbow while sparring in the gym. Speaking of getting elbowed in the face, what I want to talk to you about is some tough situations that might happen when you are interviewing, particularly if you are in an interview and you get asked a question about something that you don't necessarily know a lot about or you don't have experience with. How can you handle such a situation? Now, these things or these situations occur particularly if you are still fresh out of university or you are a junior with 1 or 2 years of experience, not a lot of experience under your belt, you don't have experience with a lot of different areas or disciplines in cybersecurity, so these things might come up. Now, I'll talk about how you can avoid this happening in the first place, maybe in another video. But what I want to focus on today is how you would handle this specific situation when it occurs in an interview. Because let's be honest, it will happen at one point in time. Even for experienced people, some people like me with 15 years of experience, at one point in time, there will be an interview question that you don't know the answer to. And that's not necessarily because you're not prepared, because some interviewers, they have this sort of style of interviewing where they will keep drilling and drilling and drilling until you sort of trip and stumble over a question that you don't have the answer to. And that's just a style of interviewing. There's no right or wrong way of doing these kind of questions, particularly in technical interviews. But if you find yourself in a situation like this, how can you handle it? What are some of the strategies or things that you can do to make sure that you come out with the least bit of damage? So the first thing is, of course, before you walk into an interview, you want to be prepared. Needless to say, this is a situation that you want to avoid before you even get in an interview. So once you go through the interview sort of question lists, common questions, you go through the job description, you go through the job responsibilities, you make sure that you are as prepared as possible. Having said that, it can be tough sometimes and difficult to be prepared for every single point on this job responsibility list, so to speak, because you might not have the experience or you might not know about these topics. So you get asked a question and you don't know the answer to. What can you do? There are 2 scenarios here. The first scenario, which is actually 3 scenarios. Let's start with the best case scenario. Best case scenario, you get asked the question, you know the topic, so you have the knowledge, plus you have the hands-on experience. Best case scenario, you can talk about the topic, you can showcase your experience, you're good to go. We don't have to worry about that. Let's move on to the other side of the table, sort of 180 degrees, worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is if you ask the question and you don't know what the topic is and you don't have practical experience. Neither the theoretical knowledge nor the practical experience. In that instance, how can you handle such a question? First, let me tell you what you shouldn't do at all. The one thing you should never, ever do in an interview is lie. Don't try to come up with an answer. Don't try to invent something just so you would answer. Don't lie. The problem is when you lie is that your interviewer is going to very quickly pick up on the fact that you are lying, particularly if they are experienced in the domain that they are asking you about. And some interviewers, like myself, for example, are very sensitive to lying. If I catch somebody lying in an interview, this is a huge red flag, and chances are they're out of the equation, no matter how skilled or good they are. That just shows a certain character type or a certain personality trait that I don't want in my team, I don't want in my company. If you lie, you already got yourself in trouble. So the first thing you do not want to do is don't lie. So what can you do? Try to think of an answer and try to somehow get the interviewer to validate your answer. So let's say, for example, your interviewer asks you about, what is XDR or what is MDR? And you have no idea. You don't know what XDR is, you don't know what MDR is, but maybe you know what EDR is. You haven't worked with EDR, you don't have practical experience, but you have theoretical knowledge. You know what EDR is, and you know, maybe not even E. Maybe you know what D and R is. You know that it is detection and response, and it could be some tools that you could use for detection and response. So you could answer along these lines, even if you don't know what XDR or MDR is. You could say something along the lines, by the way, whenever I say you could say something, I don't want you to take my words word for word and just use them in an interview. These are just examples that I'm using to demonstrate the way of thinking and what you could or couldn't do. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's go back to our example. So you could answer along the lines of, I know that DR is detection and response, and that is a tool that you will use to detect threats, respond to threats like malware, etc., and so on. Could XDR be something similar to this? And your interviewer might be kind enough to say yes. Or could MDR be something similar to this? And your interviewer might be kind enough to say something that, not necessarily, it could be part of MDR and so on. And they might start giving you some hints. So if that's the case, you have avoided, first and foremost, lying, because this is something you never ever want to do. And you've avoided saying something along the lines of, no, I don't know, and leaving it at that. When you say, no, I don't know, that is something else you want to avoid, because that immediately means that you've lost this question. You immediately put a full stop and you said, that's it, I don't know, I'm admitting that I don't know. And unless you really truly have no idea, try to avoid that. Try to avoid saying, no, I don't know, or no, I have no idea what this is. Okay, so try to think of something similar, so to speak, and try to connect some dots. Now, this is the worst case scenario. This is the scenario where you have no clue, no idea what's being asked of you. Let's take the better scenario and the more common scenario. The more common scenario is you've done your prep work, you've studied for the interview, you went through the job description, you know what, or you can expect and anticipate what they might be asking you about, but unfortunately you don't have practical experience. So you know the theory behind some of the topics, but you don't have practical experience. So something that might come up quite often in pen testing interviews is, do you have any scripting experience? Do you know any Python scripting or any other scripting experience? Now, you might have done a little bit of scripting in university or a little bit of programming, but maybe you don't have the experience outside what you've done at university. You haven't worked on projects yourself and so on. So how would you handle a situation like this? The first thing that I want you to be, and this is something lacking with a lot of fresh graduates and a lot of juniors that I work with and mentor, is be confident. I want you to be confident of what you know. I want you to be confident of what you have done. See, the thing is, and this is a sort of pitfall that I see a lot of you guys fall in, is you try to answer the question the way you think the question was asked. You think the interviewer asked you, are you an expert in Python? But that's not what they asked. If they asked you, do you have any experience with Python or with scripting? Why would you say something such as, oh, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in Python? That's not what they asked. There isn't a lot of people that are experts in Python. And as a matter of fact, I personally would not call myself an expert in information security or cybersecurity, even after 15 years of experience. Expertise is a very difficult thing to attain. So don't put this pressure on yourself. Don't think that they asked you if you're an expert or not. That's not what they are expecting of you. Know that they know that you are not an expert. They know that already. They know that you're a fresh graduate. They know that you are a junior. They don't expect you to be an expert. So don't answer this question. That is not what was asked. They asked you if you have some experience in Python or some experience in scripting. So if you do, make sure that you are confident in your answer and say, yes, I do. I've done this. I've done a little bit of Python, I've worked on some projects, I've done some scripts that do, basic brute forcing, basic web scraping, etc. Show and demonstrate your ability, show and demonstrate your experience. Now, the scenario here is maybe you don't have the experience. Maybe you know a little bit of Python, but maybe you haven't worked on some projects. So what you want to do here is you want to draw from a similar experience if you have a similar experience. If the question is, do you have any experience in Python scripting? Maybe you don't, but maybe you have some experience in C programming or Java programming, or if you are born in the 60s, Perl programming. Just kidding. So in that sense, draw from a similar experience. Again, what you want to do is you want to show that you are proactive. You want to show that you do some extracurricular activities. You want to show that you take the initiative and that you do things on your own. When I interview somebody, and I ask them, do you have experience in XYZ? If the only answer is, yes, we've done this at university, I am still a little bit skeptical, because that tells me two things. One, you did this because you have to, because it is part of your curriculum. You were forced to do it. And two, you didn't really take the time or take the initiative to go and do something extra. So I will still be a little bit skeptical. I'm happy that you know it, but I'm not very impressed. I'm impressed when you tell me that, yes, I've done something extracurricular. I've taken some initiative. I've done something extra on my own. So try to draw from other experiences as well. Now, there are some situations where you will be asked a question and you are not too confident about the answer still. You're still not sure. You're trying to process the question. Have you done any projects that you might think that they will like? In that instance, what I want you to do is think out loud. If you're not sure of the answer, maybe you've done a couple projects in Python. And we're sticking to the Python example here just to make it a little bit easier, but it could be anything. We'll use some other examples in a moment. So maybe you've done some projects. Maybe you've done some basic, like I said, brute forcing scripts or web scraping scripts or whatever scripts, but you're not sure if they're going to impress your interviewer or not. You're thinking about this. Don't keep it in your mind. Blurt it out. Think out loud. Tell your interviewer what you're thinking. So tell your interviewer something along the lines of, I'm thinking about these couple of scripts that I've done. They do X, Y, Z and 1, 2, 3. I'm not sure, is this what you're looking for or not? And it's absolutely fine if you ask for a clarification about the question, by the way. If you're still not too sure how to answer the question, if you are still thinking, oh, do they want me to be an expert in Python? Provide your answer. Think out loud about your answer. Oh, I think I've done these, or I'm thinking about these two scripts that I've done in the past couple of weeks. They do 1, 2, 3, X, Y, Z. Is that something along the lines of what you're thinking about? I wonder, the job, what kind of skills does it require in Python? Is that enough? Do I need to be a little bit more advanced? Do I need to be writing more complex scripts? Do I just need to be reading code? Get some answers. And you will be surprised. You will be surprised how sometimes you are setting your expectations this high and the job interview expectations is this high. You're just putting pressure on yourself with no point really. So feel free to think out loud and ask for some clarifications. Another thing you could do as well, and I call this the politician answer. And that's not something that you should be doing too often, but you could do if you are a little bit stuck. So the politician answer is this. It is called a redirection. And that basically is a technique where you would answer a question that you wish you were asked instead of answering the question that you were asked. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're a politician, you are doing a press conference and somebody asks you, so Mr. Politician, what is your plan for the unemployment rate in our country? And you don't want to answer that. So what you see a lot of politicians do is they answer a question they want to answer. And they will go something along the lines of, I don't know, well, I don't think the question here is about the unemployment rate. I think the question here is about what are we going to do for the education system in our country. Let me tell you about that. We're going to be doing 1 and 2 and 3. And then when this is the result, you will see how this is going to reflect on the unemployment rate and how unemployment is going to reduce. And what they ended up doing, Mr. Politician here, is they have answered a completely different question, and they completely avoided the unemployment question. They gave no strategy, no plan, no agenda. They just answered the question that they wanted to answer. And you could do something similar, right? So let's take an example. Let's steer away from Python for a little bit. Let's talk pen testing. Let's say you get a question on, tell me a little bit about the infrastructure pen testing methodology. What would you do if you are pen testing a certain network? What are your steps? What is the methodology? Maybe you've never done this before and you didn't prepare for the interview. Make sure that you're prepared and you don't have an answer to this. But you have done some bug bounty and you have experience with web application testing and you know you have a little bit of information about the methodology of what a web app pen test methodology looks like. So you could answer this and you could answer the question in that way. You could say something along the lines of, well, I've done a little bit of bug bounty, a little bit of web app pen testing, and the methodology that I would follow is 1, 2, 3, 4. You didn't necessarily answer the question about infrastructure pen testing, but you did answer a question about pen testing. You see? So what could happen in situations like this is the interviewer might let that slide, might like your answer, might be happy with what you provided. Some interviewers might still, hold their ground and ask you to still answer the question, the original question of, okay, this is great. You've told me about, your web app methodology, but tell me about infrastructure pen testing methodology. So in that case, you're going to have to fall back to the previous steps that we talked about. And ultimately, if you really, truly, genuinely don't know the answer, what would you do? Don't lie. Now, the other thing that I want you to do as well is when you get asked the question is to take your time. If you want to think about it, think about it. Don't rush. Look, this isn't a 1 + 1. What's the answer? Quickly. No, take your time, right? Chill. Think of it as a conversation. Sometimes you're having a conversation with your friend. They ask you a question. What is the meaning of life? And you have to think about it for a second or two or a minute or two. And that's absolutely fine. And you can say that, you can express it in the interview. If your interviewer says, tell me about XYZ, what do you know about it? If you're trying to gather your thoughts, tell them, give me a second, let me try to remember. Give me a second, let me think about it. Here's a question. Tell me about a situation where your customer was very difficult to deal with. You submitted a pen testing report and your customer rejected it. Or your customer, for example, said, no, I don't accept this severity to be severity 5. I want you to drop it to severity 1 from height or critical to low. How would you handle such a scenario? Now, these are common questions. These are questions that will come up in your pen testing interview. And maybe you don't remember particularly a scenario like this. So it's absolutely fine to say, give me a minute to think about it, please, or give me a minute to remember, and take your time trying to remember. If you remember, great. If you don't, move on to the next step. What's the next step? Tell the interviewer or ask the interviewer if it's okay to answer this question a little bit later in the interview. Maybe you can't remember a scenario like this. Look, I've done pen testing for more than 10 years. I remember one instance, and literally just one instance that I remember that stuck in my mind, where a customer was extremely difficult when I was presenting the report, and they were flat out rejecting the report and saying, no, this vulnerability doesn't exist. This vulnerability doesn't exist. But the evidence was there. The vulnerability is there. The evidence was there. But the customer was in denial, basically, and saying, no, it didn't happen. This doesn't exist. And this is still in my mind. It's still stuck in my mind from, 10, 11 years ago, because it was quite a unique situation, particularly because I was still fresh in the sort of industry, still fresh in the job. And luckily, I was able to handle this scenario. But beyond that, in the past, or in my experience of 10 plus years of pen testing, I genuinely don't remember more scenarios like this. So if you're still fresh and you get asked a question like this, tell me about a difficult customer, maybe you don't have a scenario like this, or maybe you do, but you don't remember it. So it's absolutely fine if you say, I don't remember a specific scenario like this. If you don't mind, let's come back to this question a little bit later. Maybe in a few moments, I'll remember something like this. That's absolutely fine. All right. So to recap, here's what we talked about today. When you are sitting for an interview, there are some times when you will get a question and you don't have necessarily the answer to, and this can fall under two scenarios or two categories. One, you don't know the theory and you don't have the practice. So you don't know the topic, you don't have practical experience. Worst case scenario, in that instance, what you want to do is, first and foremost, you don't want to lie. Did I emphasize this enough? Just in case, don't lie. Ever, ever, ever lie. Okay? The other scenario, which is a little bit better and definitely much more common, is when you know about the topic, you have some theoretical experience, but you don't have the practical experience. So what do you do in this situation? First and foremost, be confident. Don't answer the questions that you think you're being asked. They're not asking if you're an expert, so be confident of what you have done. Think of something similar that you have done. Showcase your experience. If you don't necessarily have the direct experience in that specific topic in Python or in whatever, think of something similar that you have done and showcase your ability, showcase your extracurricular activity, showcase the extra miles and extra steps that you have done. If you are trying to analyze the question and analyze the answer, feel free to think out loud and feel free to follow up with some questions. So think out loud. We gave an example of, I've done this script and that script. I don't know if this is exactly what you're looking for. Is that something that will fit in the job role? Is that something that you are expecting of me? Can you tell me a little bit more about what you are expecting? Then you have the politician redirection. And this is basically when you answer a question you hope or you wish you were asked, as long as it somehow still fits into what you are talking about. If you are talking about infrastructure pen testing and methodology and you answer a question about web pen testing methodology, that is still within the bracket of pen testing. But if you start talking about how to bake cookies, maybe a little bit off topic, but if you do know how to bake cookies, let me know, because we're gonna become best friends. Next, take your time. It's absolutely fine to take your time, try to sort of refresh your memory, jog up your memory a little bit, and tell the interviewer that, is it okay for me to think about this for a second or two or a minute or two? And last but not least, you can always ask to answer the question a little bit later in the interview. So that's it for me from now. I truly, genuinely hope that this is going to help some of you in the next interview. If it does, please let me know. I always love to hear about the success of the people I work with, the students I mentor, and from you guys specifically. If that helps you in any way, shape, or form, please let me know. That keeps me motivated to make more videos like this. I'm gonna stop talking for now, and I will see you soon in another video.